So today I'm going to give you a little lightning talk on birds, which is one of my hobbies. One of those things that I like doing on the weekends, and sometimes if it's summer, I can sneak away early and go do a little birding as well.
Birds and lasers, huh?
Birds and lasers. Actually, you just mentioned it. Well, never the twain shall meet. My last slide actually has something like that. But what got me into birding? So I think I was just tired of my regular hobbies and was looking for something new to do. And I wanted it to be outdoors. And I've got crummy knees, so I can't do anything that really is too physical. So birding is actually a very good pursuit along those lines. I took a course from the Vancouver School Board, just a night course with one of the guys on I can't remember the name of the organization, but it's basically a nature group in Vancouver. And he had an absolutely encyclopedic knowledge of birds. He knew every single species that shows up in this area. He knew all their calls. He knew all of their plumage colors, be they male or female, and their flight patterns and everything. He's pretty amazing guy to hang out with, because he could tell you anything you wanted to know. So once I did that, there were a few field trips that they took us out on, and it really started to click with me, because you sort of engage all your senses, and in a way it's a little bit like QA, in that there's a lot of pattern recognition that happens there. Use your senses, like I say. You walk very slowly, you stop, you look, you listen, take in all the data as it were. You're looking for minute movements in the leaves or the trees. You're looking for flashes of color, and you're listening for sound. So it really enhanced a walk in the forest for me, and so that's what really got me into it. So much that I ended up going on a trip to the Amazon 3 years ago to Ecuador to have a look at birds there. A friend of mine had been to a lodge there that's on a lagoon on one of the tributaries of the Amazon called the Napo River, and you can only get in there by foot after a 2-hour riverboat ride in the Amazon. It's quite isolated and beautiful, and I was the only person on that trip actually who had an interest in birds. Everybody else was going to go and learn more about sort of the general area. There's some very interesting Aboriginal culture there. There's lots to see. Of course, there's a huge amount of biodiversity in the Amazon. Everywhere you look, we're kicking Heiko out. Everywhere you look, when you're in a forest here, for example, you might see a stand of hemlocks or a bunch of Douglas firs, something like that. When you're in the Amazon, you turn and every tree that you look at is different. So it's an incredible amount of diversity. With that comes tiny little ecosystems for birds, different food sources, and also Ecuador is on a sort of a migratory flight path, and so a lot of them make landfall at this point when they're flying either to the south or to the north. I did see some birds that show up here, some sandpipers in Ecuador, which was kind of disorienting, but that they're on their way up. So BC has, I'm going to get this number a bit wrong, but it's about 350 species of birds in this province. In Ecuador, which is a lot smaller than BC, they have over 680 different species. So there's a huge number to see. That little guy, if you can see him, is a spangled cotinga, which it looks like a little neon sign flying around. It's really bright blue. There's a huge amount of energy being put into that plumage. One thing about birds is, if you watch the mallard ducks here, which are quite common, you'll see around this time of year the males are very brightly colored, and their plumage looks beautiful. Once breeding season is over, all their plumage, all the fancy plumage falls away, and they almost look like the female, which is a more of a drab color. The reason for that, apparently, is that it takes a huge amount of biological energy, whatever that is, to produce that very bright plumage that attracts the mate. And also it's some speculation the females don't do this because they don't want to be observed while they're on their nests protecting the eggs. So my trip to Ecuador, I had a couple of native guides, and I had them all to myself because nobody else was interested in birds. So every morning we go out at like 5 or 5:30 in the morning, tramping into the forest with these guys. One of them used to be a sergeant major in the army, so he was very, he wouldn't let me slack at all. Kept us moving pretty quickly. And they didn't speak any English. They spoke Spanish and Quechua, which is the local language. And these two guys, first of all, they knew all the birds that they were seeing, so all of the 600 some odd species. But second of all, they could spot things that I could not spot with my binoculars. So they would be looking up in the trees, and they'd point out something. Where? What are you looking at? And they would see a bird, not as flashy as this one, but something that, to all intents and purposes, seemed concealed in the treetops. We saw some really interesting birds. The largest eagle in the world is called a harpy eagle, and that actually takes monkeys and sloths and things. So they were flying around there. They're pretty wicked looking guys. And another one that we saw was a zigzag heron. It's the smallest heron, and the guides were calling to this bird. They both knew how to do bird calls as well, or they would use an app on their phone, which is totally cheating. But it's okay, right? And they could hear a zigzag heron in the shrubs off the path, and they were trying to call this guy for a couple of days, and couldn't get it to come out and see us. And finally, on the last day out, they managed to get the little zigzag heron to come out and see us, and they got very excited. They hadn't seen one of those in years, apparently. So even if you're spotting birds all the time, you can still get a lot of really cool surprises. That's another thing I like about it. A surprise like watching a heron eat a frog, which took about 15 minutes and was one of the most horrible things I've ever seen. Here's another little anecdote. So this guy is a brambling. Bramblings are very common in Eurasia. They flock in the thousands. But one, a couple of years ago, appeared in Vancouver. He was the only one. He was all by himself, hung out with other birds. To go and see him, you would go to the back alley at 17th and Laurel. He was hanging out in somebody's backyard, and that was his home base for as long as he stayed. What probably happened was that he got blown across the Bering Strait during a storm. So he should have been migrating down to India. Instead, he migrated down to Vancouver from the north. And so there's a term in birding called twitching, which is where you pick a location based on a bird that you've heard is there. So these are the real hardcore birders will twitch. And so 17th and Laurel back alley became a twitching destination. You can see all these people, my tribe, standing around looking at this little bird. Is what are you looking at? Why are you looking at me?
Did he get deported?
What's that?
Did he get deported?
He didn't get deported. He disappeared. I think. Well, he was hanging out with a bunch of sparrows because he's about the same size, and I think he seemed happy and well fed when I saw him. So anyway, that was it was a really interesting time. You can take birding to incredible depths if you want. You can just walk around and look at the birds that you see in the forest, or you can really get into knowing all the calls, knowing what all the plumage looks like, the names of all the feathers, the taxonomies, what have you. And you can really geek out. So I'm a trained spectroscopist. That was what I did my PhD work in. And I have a friend who is the editor of Applied Spectroscopy magazine, and she pointed out this article to me on the exploitation of mid-infrared iridescence of plumage for remote classification of nocturnal migrating birds. So yes, they're shining lasers at birds and seeing and in the mid-infrared and watching them migrate. So there is your laser bird connection, Mike. anyway, so I think that's an example of going maybe a little bit too far on the geek spectrum, but anyway, it's part of the fun. So that's all I have.
Questions?
What's
So-
the best bird you've seen?
The best bird around Vancouver. That's
Well,
actually
your
Show
favorite.
us the
sorry.
picture.
my favorite.
bird to...
Well, I popped up on the Slack channel with what I knew about the black-capped chickadee, which I still think is a really cool bird, because they are the only birds that we know of that cache food. They store it like squirrels do. Also, they're such good finders of food sources that other birds follow them around. And I've seen this happening where a couple of chickadees will land in a bush, and then instantly you see all the also-rans coming after them, going, oh, yeah, what'd you find? So finches and sparrows and things like that also show up in the same. But I think, you could also say that some of the raptors are really fun to watch. The owls or the harriers or the hawks. I saw a peregrine falcon one time on the beach do his stoop, in which they reach speeds of up to 300 kilometers an hour. And he went right through a flock of dunlin, which is if you ever look out on the water and you see a whole bunch of birds and then they all turn and they disappear, those are probably dunlin. Went through a flock of those and came out empty, but I've never seen anything move that fast. It was just the most incredible thing.
So you seem to try and avoid self-categorizing yourself as a twitcher, but then you kind of defined yourself as one by putting you in the same place as all the other twitchers.
Oh yeah, I'm not denying it. I went to New Westminster to see another bird sort of like that one time.
Do twitchers use Twitter?
Well, that's tweeters.
Wouldn't they use Twitch?
Yeah.
Any other questions? All right, well, thank you.
Oh, I had a question.
Right.
Most delicious type of bird.
Most delicious,
Oh.
the most delicious type of bird. Swab.
Pigeons.
I like it.
Yeah, not a big fan.
What?
Never tried.
Did you catch your own? 'Cause I don't think that's
My dad raised pigeons for 60 years or something. We ate his pigeons on occasion, but they were never good.
Do you think that he was selling the good ones and like, hey Mike, this guy died.
This guy died.
That is entirely probable. But when he was in Chilliwack, he was giving the dead pigeons to a vet who was using them to teach the dogs to bird.
Or do you need the projector?
I don't need
All right, one last round of applause for Mr. Birder. Thank you.